Okay, now I have second time I've made this video because I'm struggling with the record button. Okay, you don't care. You know, let's talk about modeling, and maybe, and of course I've talked about the pandemic and modeling, and maybe you think, aha, if I want to be a good modeler, I'm going to follow these rules so carefully. I'm going to have best practices. And then you think, my success in life is when an auditor says my model's okay. It probably has a bunch of errors because they never find the real errors. And if that's your objective, turn off this video. But on the other hand, if you want to break through, Excel's this fantastic program that your grandmother uses, and you should teach to your child when they're 9 or 10 years old, and it's wonderful, but it has limits. Here are a couple of the limits. It does not allow you to, if you have 20 different scenarios, it doesn't kind of different calculations. It doesn't allow you to plop out one. You have to write everything down, and the circular reference is the big one. So if you want to be a little innovative, you can finish this. This one is the finishing part of explaining the technical issues with the UDF. There's going to be the second video that's a matching part of this where it's all finished, and I'm going to show you how to put this template, which I just said was bad. I'm a complete hypocrite. I'm going to show you how to put this on and this. Now, in project finance, please, it's taken me so long to learn it, but it's a beautiful thing in a way because you're letting somebody else outside of your company tell you about the risk of your project. And the manner in which they're telling you about the risk of the project is how much debt you can have, and that depends on the risks of the project and also the contracts. And they're telling you how to repay the debt, how long to repay the debt. That again is a function of the contracts you have and the kind of goodness, and if they trust your EPC contractors. All of that comes into the financing. It's not just a bunch of little rules and that we'll do this or that. If you're negotiating with the banks or the banks on the other side, you're really thinking about the risks and the structure of the financing, and that's why you look at equity IRR. And then here are the pain points. Those damn buttons. I can't believe how afraid I am to press a button in a model after all these years, and how long it takes to run one of your monster models with 20 different, 5 different debt tranches, and you have to put the commitment fee and the whatever the standby fee on every single tranche, and you have to put in a standby, and you think, I'm so good, I can do this, I'm so proud of myself. Bull. Then the debt sculpting with changing can become very complicated with limits on how much you put in. And I've heard all these stories of people making 40 scenarios with different tries to figure out what kind of thing can really work. And if you can imagine doing that at the end of a transaction where they just change the interest rate or something like that, whew, if you change the debt to capital or the DSCR decides the debt, oh, I've talked about that too much. If DSRA is changing and you want the changes in the DSCR in the CFADS for sculpting, if you have multiple issues, multiple currencies, if you want to stick refinancing in at the end, if you want to have a bunch of scenarios laid out and you don't want to have to write a gigantic macro to do it all, okay, that's the problems. So that's some of the problems. Now, you can just say, I don't care about these. I'm going to do it the way I'm taught to do it. I'm going to, and you can be a lemming like that. These are these little animals. They're cute little animals. They follow each other. You know that. But we want to show you how to be innovative. Now, I could do this just by showing you the last little tool that we'll show in the next video where I wonder if I have it open. I don't have it open. This little tool, not a little tool. I've spent years on this stupid thing. Uh, where it's like a gigantic sum function, and you're just going to take this thing and you're going to slap in some non-circular reference stuff, the capex and the EBITDA, you're going to put in different debt structuring techniques. You're going to put in some parameters about each debt, which cause the problem, either sculpt it or don't sculpt it. You have multiple issues. You either size it based on the debt to capital, you put a DSRA in here, and you put a whole bunch of other crap, all that stuff in, and you just plop this into your model. It's like a circular reference page at the back end of your model, and then it'll operate. I'm going to show you that next, but I'm not going to show you that this time. What I'm going to do this time is show you kind of the end of our little travels through circular references. And in our first example, I made a circular reference, and I said, well, our circular reference was the fees times the debt just below. And I didn't accumulate the debt or do anything fancy in this one. And then we had a single blue button. And that single blue button was all nice to do. I'm going to hopefully put now I'm going to put it back. We don't want a circular reference for that in here. But that was an easy one to solve. We didn't have to have any array variables. What we did need to do is put fees here and fees here. And we just had to loop around. We had to make kind of our own circular reference loop. And that was the first example. The second example was a little more complicated. Now we had one variable, DSRA, and can I make this DSRA circular? This came from this one. So what if I can put this computed down as over here? That didn't work because I have a circular reference. Hang on. This one. Let's put this. This is going to be too obvious. I should have practiced this. We have a circular reference, and then now we have to go backwards. It's a little more complicated, but we had to compute this. We had to go get this one, and this one came from this one, and we had to essentially get the total debt here. That's what I was trying to make happen, but I'm going to take it away. Now, in this example, it's a much more classic example. And in this example, we have a problem with our fees. Let's make our fees equal to computed fees. And then we have that circular reference. Not so bad. But if we put the IDC in here then too, then we have to go backwards and we have to compute the opening and closing balance of the debt to get the IDC. And these blue lines never really help me at all, but whatever. That depends on the debt depends on this, and they all depend on each other. And we have an accumulation. And the other thing we have, remember, if you don't ever want to do this, you don't have to. You can use this other next video I'm doing where I'm going to show you how to put it in, but I would hate to put that thing in without understanding where it comes from. I'm showing you where it comes from. This time, the UDF goes into 3 cells. And when we go into 3 different cells, it gets a little more complicated, okay? And when we have to keep track of things. Now, the first thing to do is let's find this. It's called circular. I just call this circular. Let's find the UDF. Now, if you press Alternate and F8 to look for all these things, there's nothing called circular here, is there? So I made a little subroutine. I don't know really what to call a macro versus a subroutine. Is that what you call a macro? A macro is just kind of copying something. Oh, who knows? Exactly. Who gives a crap about that kind of stuff? Okay, so I put a little subs there to find it. There's another way to find it. Somebody might send me a little note that says, you idiot, can't you figure out how to find all the functions there? Okay, whatever. I show you ways that I've learned, which is not by reading a book, which is just by hitting my head against the wall. Now, if we're going to make this work, and if we're going to make it go into multiple different places like this is like a This is like the transpose function. If we put equal transpose, okay, then we press Shift Control F3. Oops! Oh no! I'll explain that in a minute. Oh, that was embarrassing. But then that's our transpose function. I can't get rid of it now. I'll explain why. Because I made an error in the last video I did, and I didn't take it back out. So we can also go to the developer and then the macros and find our thing. So the first issue is that when you have a function that goes into multiple places, you use this variant thing right here at the end. You use this thing. That's number one. Then, okay, let's go to number two. Notice that I'm starting to have to read in det percent, DSRA percent, CapEx. When I read in CapEx and the construction flag, let's just talk about this. I need to take away this message box for just a minute, and you just put a single little inverted comma, whatever you call that thing, in there. Now, that's so it won't print out. Now, when you do this, if I press Shift and F3, up, Shift and F3, this is bad news, by the way. It should have an answer. Oh, no. Yes, it has an answer. Here's the answer. It goes into the different things. Ooh, I was scared. Some of the variables, I call them scalars, if you take a statistics class, but that people don't call them constants. This is a constant. But this one, the CapEx here, and it doesn't kind of show you it, that's bad, but that's an array variable. That's a time series variable. Maybe you call it S. Why you call it S series? I don't know. Input S, input C. Okay, and the construction flag is also a time series variable, and the interest rate, I just made that a scalar, but I call it you got to call that a constant, right? So when you read these in, it's so confusing how to define the variables, this kind of junk. But this construction flag, it doesn't say that that's a scalar or an array variable. This is somehow Excel is going to know, or the VBA is going to know that this is a time series variable. These are scalar variables, C variables, okay? And then you read it in as a variant. Now, the next thing, I'm going to move this here because this is where I made a mistake in my last one. The next thing you can do is count how many periods you want to go around and around for accumulation. And you don't have to remember, you don't have to take a class in VBA or anything else or get a book in VBA like I did. I got 3 or 4 books and I never opened the stupid things. That's before, you can find everything you want in Google anyway. That's really the way to, when you get stuck with this, you just go to Google, right? Okay, and then it says construction flag dot count. This periods is a variable. It'll count how many numbers are in this. Now, whenever I do this, I use option base 1. So the first, it'll count from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We had about 10 in there, okay? And if you want to see how many you had in there, you can always, there are all these fancy ways to do this debug crap. If you put MSGBOX and put periods, I do that so often because I make so many mistakes. Now, when you run this thing, this is what just happened. And when I press F2 and press Shift Control Enter, it'll say that I have 12 periods. And we're going to go around and around those periods, okay? So you can kind of do some of that, maybe. We don't need this anymore, okay? And you can check what's going on. Now, the next thing you have, this is so confusing. Oh, let's do the real confusing part. This output variable, you would think I could just define circular 1 and circular 2 and circular 3. Somehow I could just take this one. Remember, at the very end, we have to define this one. Now, what I would suggest you do, you don't have to, is here's the problem. In Excel, you obviously have a table and rows and columns. That's the best thing about Excel. also the thing we're trying to get around, by the way, so we don't have to limit ourselves to show everything we're doing. We can put some stuff inside the model without clunking around. But we have three rows. It's always the row first and then the column. If you would just put it like this, it wouldn't work. And it took me 20 years to figure that silly thing out. And then you can define this variable and all this. Now, when I made my mistake, I thought I had to define these. We can be really lazy, and why not? Let's be as lazy as we possibly can. Now, then, so that this output, let's just show you what happens when, and then I should up here say, look at the bottom. Define circular equal output. So it's going to define this little area when you put things in. That's a pain. And then we're going to put in the DSRA, the IDC, and the fees. And at the very end, we just put in that output. That is painful. And I have had trouble explaining this one because I kind of just kept making mistakes and just hitting my head against the wall and said, oh, maybe what's going on? Okay, and then we do the same sort of thing I've explained before. We set some difference. I thought my error was that I defined difference wrong. That was not my error. And just in case, I said I don't want to go through an infinite loop. So that's a dangerous thing. You'll have to, if you go around and around in a loop, sometimes you'd have to go to the task manager and restart Excel. So somewhere down here, I said, if we've gone to 1,000 different things, let's stop. Okay, now then we have a couple of variables. I could do this with fees as well, and we remember what the last time we computed it and this time, and if we're going around and around and around, if the last time equals this time, blah blah blah, we can stop. Maybe I should do this as well. I could put, because we have three different ones, why don't I put last fees equal fees. And do I have fees defined? Just a minute. Down at the bottom, I have fees 1, 1. Ooh, that's going to be a little confusing. Okay, 1, 1. I'll try to explain that as we go down. Now we're going through Excel. Or we're going through Excel. And remember, I really almost want to start at the bottom. And at the very bottom, somewhere down here, we want to define what the DSRA is, what the total IDC is, and what the total fees are, but I kind of cheated with the total fees. You know what? Why don't I do this? I'm gonna put fees we just had in the first period, so I'm gonna put total fees equal worksheet function, and then we dot sum. So this is where you can define anything you want, and you put fees 1. I called it fees 1, and then so up here, then we can where I put the fees kind of cheated here, we'll put total fees. Okay, those are our things we want. We can stop with that, but let's take the fees. How do we get the fees? Well, we have to get the debt balance somewhere. We have to get the total debt, which is addition of all the debt financing. And then we have to multiply that, but we only want to do that in the first financial close period. So we put fees, I used fees 1 equals the debt times the fee percent. But if it's not the first period, we put it 0. And this is a pain. And if the same kind of thing goes for the debt balance. The debt balance is this accumulation business where we have the debt balance this period. In the very first period, it's just the amount of financing, but then in the other periods, it's the last debt balance plus the financing. What a pain. But this little example has all the kind of painful things you have to, not all, of course not all, but some of the painful things you have to do to get this working. and really to make your own little UDF for the beginning part of it. And it will be frustrating. And that's why I'm going to finally get this stupid thing on the website that where it's in the circular reference part of it. Okay. And then we go back and define our debt financing as uses times debt percent. Of course, we have to read in the debt percent at the top. And then we say our total uses is CapEx plus construction flag times DSRA, which we computed below. And you can see how things should make your head spin around off and, go crazy. I had some wonderful person I met said, this is making my head spin. It should be making your head spin. And each one of these things that you define as something that you need every single period to accumulate it, you need to put a DIM. You need to define this. What a pain. But that's the one thing it needs to know, what's an array variable and what's a scalar variable. I'm sorry, or what's a time series variable or input S variable versus an input C variable. You kind of do that anyway. And then since I've done this before, we go around and around, and at the very end, after the loop, I put it in before the loop at first, you define what the row 1 is, row 2, what row 3, and up here where we have a difference, we can say, well, here are our total fees, fees minus the last fees, and I hope I didn't forget that. And the last fees are the last time we computed the total fees. And let me come. Now, if I do that, if you notice how I put a capital T there, then I put a capital T over here and kind of up, and look at this. It would have given me an infinite loop or something when I did this. Now it uncapitalized everything, didn't it? Why? Okay. And so we have it. I'm totally afraid to run it now, but these are the big points, the last kind of things to do. So then let's take these, press F2, Shift Control Enter, and it works. And here's what I finally sometimes do. And I used to be afraid of doing this. I've got these bizarre fears. Okay. You can put a little message box here. That's allowed. You can't put a range name in here, but there's nothing wrong with putting a little message box. And now, when let's change our thing to 80%. Now, there's a reason I'm showing you this. And then it's horrible. You have to put OK each time. If you use a user form with modeless, I just learned this by stealing it from somebody. It'll just show it, and notice how the difference is going down. And how many things do we have? We had about 23 before we went to 0. So let's change the DSRA percent to 7%. Again, we start with a difference, and then it's going down. And that principle is the principle behind the whole thing. So that's enough of that.